It's my very great pleasure to welcome you to today's program featuring the Honorable Kevin McCarthy, the Majority Leader of the U.S. House of Representatives. It is also so fun to look around and see so many distinguished business and civic leaders here. Thank you so much for coming. I also want to welcome our students from North Hollywood High School who are here based on Townhall's sponsorship. And they're going to probably ask you, Mr. Congressman, your toughest questions. For those of you who are new to Town Hall, we are a very vital, nonpartisan voice showcasing the most timely issues that we all need to be engaged in. There's a flyer on your seats that highlights upcoming programs that I'd like to draw your attention to. On Wednesday, February 18th, Real Solutions to Improve Mobility, Accessibility, and Your Quality of Life, or as Jim Thomas says, gridlock and congestion. Come and find out how we're going to solve all those problems. Thursday, February 26th, the Honorable John Chang, newly elected California State Treasurer. And on Thursday, April 2nd, Dennis Arroyo, the President and CEO of Southern California Gas, on the future of energy. It's now my pleasure to introduce one of our favorite Town Hall board members, Mrs. Elizabeth Lowe, who will be introducing our speaker. For those of you who don't know Mrs. Lowe, she is a supreme children's advocate for children's rights. She's a past chair of the LA County Commission for Children and Families, a past vice chair of First 5 Los Angeles, and past chair of the board of the Los Angeles Universal Preschool. And boy, when Beth wants something, it gets done, is all I can say. Beth, would you come up and introduce our speaker? And please welcome Beth Lowe.
Thank you, Kim. Let's see. It's a great honor to introduce to you Congressman Kevin McCarthy. I've known Kevin for more than 10 years, and it's been a pleasure watching him rise through the ranks in a very short time. He understands hard work. He's the grandson of a cattle rancher and the son of a firefighter, has always lived in Bakersfield, and definitely calls it home. At the age of 21, I'm told, he did buy a winning lottery ticket, and with that money, he started Kevin Odell's. It's a deli from the ground up. As he worked hard, hired employees, and enjoyed success, he soon learned, like all small businesses do, that the margins are thin, the hours are long, and the government is usually an obstacle to success. This lesson compelled Kevin to consider entering public service. He sold his business to put himself through college and graduate school at Cal State University, Bakersfield. While in college, he interned for Congressman Bill Thomas and later became a member of the congressman's staff. Many of you will remember that Congressman Thomas was for a long time the chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, so that was a good place to cut his teeth. In 2000, he won his first election as a trustee to the Kern County Community College District. And then in 2002, he was elected to the State Assembly, where he became the first freshman to hold the position of Assembly Republican leader. Kevin worked with his colleagues in the Assembly and Senate and with the governor to reduce California's budget deficit, overhaul the state workers' compensation system, and enhance California's business climate to create more opportunities for California's business. After he was elected to Congress in 2006, Kevin quickly became Chief Deputy Whip and later served as Majority Whip. About last June, my husband and my grandson and I had a wonderful tour of the Capitol and then visited Kevin's office. While he was in a meeting, we were waiting outside, and we noticed all of these Congress people coming in the door. They'd come in empty-handed, and they'd go out with a heaping plate of food. Well, it was an evening meeting that they were having and during the dinner hour. So we figured that he knew the way to his colleague's heart. Also, what happened that particular evening, the next day was the primary election in Virginia. The current majority leader was running for re-election in his district, and everybody assumed that he would win and continue to be majority leader. Well, it didn't happen. He didn't win that election, and one of the reasons that was given was that he had lost touch with his constituency. That's hard to figure when his constituency was in Virginia, not too far from Washington, D.C. Well, so the very next day after the election, there was speculation, of course, as to who would be replacing him. And all of a sudden, Bakersfield got on the map. He was elected majority leader of the House just a month or so later, where he now leads Congress in fighting for individual liberty, an efficient and effective government, free markets, and a vibrant civil society. He's the first Californian to ever be elected House Majority Leader, and in that position, he sets the agenda for the House of Representatives, deciding what bills are heard and committee assignments. I don't think that it's going to ever be an issue that Kevin McCarthy loses touch with his district. Bakersfield is his home. His wife and 2 children are there. I am told that when he's in Washington, he sleeps in his office and returns to Bakersfield every weekend, spend with his family, to be out in the community, and I've heard that he's a very good listener. Well, he's smart, he's personable, and he's effective, and it's a pleasure to ask him to come to the podium. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy.
I think that's the best introduction I ever had. I'm going to take Beth on the road with me. So if any of you ask me why I'm here, Beth invited me, just so if you ever question. Honored to be with you. And Beth told you a little bit about me. I'm glad to have high school students here because when I was in high school, no teacher ever thought I could be here, so don't worry about it. It's true, I'm born and raised in Bakersfield. I'm proud of that. My district, I represent LA County as well. I have Lancaster in it, so I feel akin. And it's true, I didn't start out to be in politics. I'm not a poli-sci, no disrespect, I'm not an attorney, but there's a lot of other bad traits in my life. And it's true I got into politics in a different manner that Beth told you about. My family, my father was a firefighter, and he had a second job. He was moved furniture on his days off. We didn't come from great wealth, but we didn't know it. I mean, we cashed the paychecks at the grocery store. And when I got out of high school, I didn't apply myself as well enough as I should. And so I went to junior college. And I always had a summer job. And LA has been a part of that. So when I was working and going to junior college, I met a guy in town that owned a liquor store but had a car dealer's license. You could figure out how an 18-year-old meets a person like that. But I talked him into taking me to the LA car auctions down here, where all the dealers bring their cars to trade in, but you have to be a dealer to get in. So I would come and I would buy cars and I would flip them to pay my way through college. Now, I did not know it's illegal, but I was being an entrepreneur. So that's what I was doing. And then, like anybody else, going to junior college, Friday night, going to go visit some people at San Diego State. Right? So I go to the grocery store to cash a check. We didn't have ATMs back then. I think this is '84. But when I cashed a check, they just started the lottery the day before. So I bought 2 tickets, and I won the lottery. True story. $5,000 was the most money you can win. But if you put yourself back in 1984, you're 18 years old, you just won $5,000, and you're 10 minutes away from Tijuana, where would you end up, right? In Congress, no. Just joking. I took my family out to dinner, I could still tell you what they ordered because I paid for it. Gave my brother and sister each $100. I took the majority of the rest and I bought one stock. I'm a person who believes in taking a risk. It was the 80s, I did pretty well. So at the end of the semester, I decided I wasn't going to go back to school. Took my money out of the market, refinanced my current car, had about $15,000 to $20,000 then. And I went out to buy a franchise. But no one really sells a 19-year-old a franchise. So I didn't stop with that, and I created my own deli. It was Subway before Subway. I even built the counter in my dad's garage. And I learned 3 valuable lessons that have never left me. When you're a small business owner, you're the first one to work, you're the last one to leave, and you're the last one to be paid. And I think everybody in the country should know those values, because it's what spurs this economy. Well, I was pretty successful. At the end of 2 years, I had enough money that I could pay my way through college without working. So I sold my business. And the local congressman, he had an article, be a summer intern in Washington, D.C. I didn't know him, but I thought he'd be lucky to have me. So I applied, and he did turn me down. But I now sit in the seat he wouldn't give me an internship for. So if you're ever interested in internships, I give more people internships than ever imagined. The only idea is you can't run against me. That's the only thing I ask. That's how I got involved. And when I want to talk to you today, it is true. I'm the first majority leader ever in the history of California. And I take great pride in that, knowing what our state is. Now, I never want to give you a false impression. I'm a conservative who believes you can solve problems. I'm not going to be a conservative who just says no to a problem. I want to take my philosophy because I believe my philosophy is stronger and I can solve a problem and make it better. I also don't believe that I have to have 100% of what I want to get the answer done. So I take that philosophy and try to apply it inside Washington, knowing how it's developed. Now, looking what has just gone through in the short time I've been there, this country has made major shifts and pendulum shifts. I went in 2006 when Democrats had a very big sweep. In 2008, they continued the sweep. And now I just watched a sweep back the other way. And you can't disregard what the country has said. And it's not just what's happened in the Senate becoming a majority, or the House. The House has the largest Republican majority since 1928. But you also have the state legislatures. Since our president's been in office, 913 seats have shifted to Republican. That's a philosophical base that has changed. Now, what we have to do is take where we are today from both sides and try to move forward, because the message I take from a lot of these elections are they're upset with the current status quo. They want to see something happen. They want to see something grow. My philosophy overall is I want to grow America's economy, not Washington. I'm not in a top-down philosophy. I take what's made California great. I look at Silicon Valley. That's bottom-up. The old philosophy of top-down has failed. And that means more people have input, more people have skin in the game, and more ideas are able to foster to be able to grow. I think that's how America is actually developed. So, in laying out the agenda, I put it in 3 categories: freedom, opportunity, and accountability. That reaches everybody in America and is not one-sided or the other. Everybody strives for the idea of greater freedom. We all want more opportunity, and we all want our government to be held accountable. Everybody can stand for that and work together. When I looked at the makeup of Washington, the House, the Senate's Republican, and the president happens to be of another party. That's not a problem to me. I've watched historically in America, we achieved some of our biggest accomplishments in divided government. Why? Because government was devised to find common ground. And when you're divided, you know you're not going to get 100% what you want. You're going to have to give a little one way or another. Today's Ronald Reagan's 104th birthday. A lot of us crave for him back. But the one thing that Reagan was able to do with Tip O'Neill, Social Security, tax reform, and be able to make America much stronger. Bill Clinton. He had Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole, welfare reform, and balanced the budget. So we have a unique opportunity at the same time. So where are the areas I want to talk today about what we can agree upon? If it's an area I don't believe we're really going to agree upon, we're all one side or the other. You know philosophical where someone's going to be, and we can have another election to define where that is. But the election is over, so where can we grow and where can we find common ground? There's a lot of places that I think will actually affect California. Some of the first actions, I think, and the way I looked at, I took bills that had already passed the House. I don't know if you listened to the campaign, there were 382 bills that passed the House that the Senate never took up. Do you know 276 of those bills were so bipartisan that they're veto-proof? So that's a perfect area to start with within the first 100 days, because then you find common ground that you get something to the president's desk, you get it signed, you show you can work together and move forward. And the Senate has changed. In the small amount of time of this 1 month that we've been in office, they've had more amendments on the floor than they had in like the last 3 years in the Senate. That's a difference. So that means both sides are getting some messages out or actually having a debate. Keystone Pipeline. We will move that next week. It came out of the Senate, 63%, and the Senate supported it. Now it's going to go to the president's desk. I know he's threatened a veto, but this is a perfect place to show common ground, to move forward. Human trafficking. It affects every single district in America. Every person in this room would stand up to stop human trafficking. And it continues to grow. And it fosters on the most vulnerable in our society. You know, we already passed 12 bills, and they weren't all Republicans. When I studied human trafficking, you know where I came? I wasn't in my own district, but I came to LA. You know who I went with? Karen Bass and I did it together through the FBI, through the organizations right down here in LA. Because what happens, if it happens in LA, it'll foster in every other city. Perfect example of finding places to work together. Cybersecurity. How many days do you wake up and hear of another company being hacked? Anthem just was hacked. This doesn't have to be a partisan issue, but it's an issue that we should dwell with together and solve. Transportation. Every day you talk about it, do you not? When you're in your cars? I look at America to be able to have greater opportunity. We're competing with other countries that have newer infrastructure than America. We're living off yesterday instead of building for tomorrow. I get frustrated with our country overall because I feel government has developed this philosophy to eliminate risk so you have no growth. I want to show you an example. I'll take the FDA. Last September, we approved a new 3D imaging to help detect breast cancer, and we all celebrated. But do you realize that 3D imaging had already been approved throughout Europe and other countries for years? So how many times did we waste because we wanted to make sure nothing would happen to anyone? It's a warm, sunny day, right? I was talking to Chairman Upton. He's in Kalamazoo and had 3 foot of snow. I said, I might get a little suntan even while I'm out today. Right? He said, watch out, wear your sunscreen. That's true. We've got a lot of skin cancer, but when was the last time a new ingredient was added to sunscreen? 15 years. But do we all know that 8 new ingredients have been waiting in the FDA for the last 10 years? Why? Then what happens in that situation? Well, money will flow somewhere else. You look at venture capital, 42% of their money now flows outside of the country when it comes to medical because it takes too long to have something achieved here. So we're losing opportunity, we're losing freedom in the process. So what will we do in this Congress? 21st century cures. A revamping of the FDA. how much will that inspire to have greater opportunity, but grow as well? I watched the president talk a little bit about that in his State of the Union. I find that's a place we're going to come together. By dealing with infrastructure, we have a system that is blocked two ways. One, financially. We all pay the tax when we fill up our car, but we use it for a lot of different other reasons. And then we put up all these roadblocks to every time you build a road. I always like to say, the Golden Gate Bridge was built in 3 years, and we've wasted the last 3 decades trying to add an on-ramp to it. That's wrong. So why can't we find another method to fund it, and at the same time find the capability to enhance our options to build? There is a great desire for that. But to me, it gives us two opportunities. Because the best way out in Washington right now to find the extra resources when it's coming due in a few months is repatriation. What is repatriation? Repatriation is a tax system that America has developed that punishes you when you make money around the world. If you bring it back, we want to tax you too high. So what do? You keep the money in another country, and you use that money to buy something and invest in another country instead of giving you the incentive to bring it back home and invest in America. So if we lowered the rate, you would bring it back. If we brought it back, we use that tax incentive to make the investment into America. So the idea of having infrastructure driven also gives us the opportunity to have tax reform. Paul Ryan just became the chairman of Ways and Means. It makes it a little stronger to get tax reform. This is the desire, what he's done his whole life. But who in here can do their own taxes? So if we start with an idea, we're going to simplify it, I think there's support on both sides of the aisle. We're going to be competitive because our current tax code finds that we're at a disadvantage worldwide, and we know we're in a global economy. A lot of people understand tax reform is hard. Anything we do is hard in Washington. Everybody wants to be opposed to it. But you know what? You shouldn't run for the office if you think it's going to be easy. I think you will find we will use the driving with infrastructure, which the president wants to do as well, the idea that they want to go after repatriation to reform the overall tax code. Because what happens when you reform the tax code? We get more opportunity and more freedom. It will unshackle what holds us back. Now, the president is where we'll differ. He only wants to do corporate tax rate. You cannot ignore the S-corps and the others. You need overall tax reform to compete. I'm a firm believer, and I don't know if anybody owns any McDonald's, but growing up during the Olympics, I would always go to McDonald's and get the little scratch off. And then if the American won, the 100-yard dash, you got free French fries. You ever do that? And that's what I love about the Olympics. It didn't matter who the person was, if they were, we all competed. But the best part about the Olympics was everybody started on the same starting line and everybody finished on the same line, right? But you ever look at America today? I was in a high school in Napa, and I was talking about the competitiveness of America in a world economy. And one of the kids raised his hands. He said, I don't understand how we have fallen so behind on the competition, from it's easier to go somewhere in Europe to get approval, or Singapore's coming after, or biotech firms, or Carl's Jr. can build one faster on Lenin Way in Moscow than they could build one in America. Why are we falling behind? This is what the student asked. So I asked the student, I said, do you play any sports? He said, I'm a swimmer. I said, well, let me try to give you an analogy based upon a swim meet. I said, picture America going to the block, and we're competing with every other country in the world, and it's right after World War II. The gun goes off, we jump into the pool. Not only do we win, we get out of the pool and dry off before second and third arrives. So we say as Americans, it's probably unfair. Everybody else got pretty decimated, we came out pretty strong. We should probably put a 5-pound weight on next year, right? So we add a little tax code to ourselves, so we jump in the water and we swim. We win again, and we said, that's probably unfair. We should make the regulations for us a little tougher. Yeah, we know the other countries don't have to compete with the regulations, but we'll make our products cost more, so we add another 10 pounds. As the years progress, we're adding 10, 20, then we get a stimulus, we add another 50 pounds. To pretty soon we have a 300-pound weight on, and sometimes we don't win. No one says take the weight belt off, they just say you don't swim like you used to. So the goal is remove the weight belts, let us compete on the same starting line, and let's see what American can do competitively. That's the motto of what I'm looking at. So I look at 100 days, I look at a year, those things that must happen. My philosophy is to have no more cliffs in Washington. Too many times you turn on TV and there's some clock ticking, right? Washington's about to blow up in the next 17 hours. Will it all shut down again? When you have those, you can't focus on the big policy. So those must pass. We have different items, a SGR, a highway bill. Finish those early and move forward to policy. That will make us stronger. Then I lay out an agenda for 2 and 4 years. It doesn't mean you can achieve everything in 2 years, but we shouldn't measure everything in a congressional term. Just make sure you achieve it. But it doesn't mean you don't start with it to be able to reform, to move forward. Now, there's another item that's out there that doesn't come really in a bill itself. It comes in the world in which we live. And the world in which we live today is dangerous. And I have a very strong disagreement with the president on the foreign policy of America. If you asked me as a political commentator to talk about why did we have such a shift, how could you capture the Senate in that year, and what did it mean for that election? I'd tell you it wasn't about Republican or Democrat. It was about how people felt as an American. And if I went in time and place in my life, is there anything similar to last November? I would say would be similar to 1979. And this is why I say it. Think about going into the last November, and you watched your government, right? You watched what happened with the Veterans Administration. You watched Ebola having some challenges. You watched an IRS system attack individuals. Then you watched people jumping over the White House and finding out you didn't even lock the door. You almost felt government had become incompetent and not being able to achieve anything. To deal with Ebola, who did they bring in? The military, because we didn't trust anybody else. Then this is where I say it's very similar to 79. When was the last time as a country we watched Americans being held hostage and felt very vulnerable with it? You saw ISIS. When was the last time a U.S. ambassador was killed on foreign soil? In 1979 in Afghanistan. Then you had Stevens in Libya. That's a direct philosophy or relationship to the respect other countries have for us around the world. And then what was the last time we watched the Soviet Union invade another country? They invaded Afghanistan, and the response from Jimmy Carter at the time was not to go to the Olympics. Then you watched Russia invade the Ukraine. And look what's happening today. Then, when was the last time you heard the word malaise? You had the speech from Jimmy Carter, but even the New York Times had an editorial, The Malaise of Our Economy. Unemployment is at a low number, right? But there's 2 ways to lower unemployment. People go to work, or they give up. Do you know our participation rate in America is at 62.7%? That's the lowest it's been since 1978, because people have given up. Now, if you give up, knowing a country that every generation has improved on the generation before it, you're saying that my future, I've given up on. I've given up on my hopes. I've given up on my dreams. That's the worst place we want to be. So you had all that play into it, and I think America as a whole said, they didn't say, oh, I want to give all this power to Republicans. I just don't feel right as an American. I want to see a change. And the most important thing that Washington can do, it has the wisdom to listen, but the courage to lead. And that's what I believe I'm going to push to make happen. And it won't be pretty. You know you get attacked in a lot of different ways, and you're going to have to make an element unsafe. But that's what we will do. So when I go back, I will go down to the White House, I think it's next Tuesday, with a group of individuals, and we will sit down with the President and the Chief of Staff, and we'll be talking about what is AUMF, Authorization for a Military Force. The President has asked about what's going on in the world. The world is very unsafe. I was just in the Middle East 2 months ago. Abu Dhabi, Doha, Saudi Arabia, Baghdad, Erbil, and down to Jordan and back home. I will tell you this, our friends do not trust us, and our enemies do not fear us. And for everything that's happening in the world, from Yemen to Iraq, the most dangerous thing we have before us today are the P5+1 negotiations with Iran. If Iran is allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, the world will never be safe. And if we take our eye off that, it's your generation I fear the most for. Remember, the President said Yemen is a great example of our foreign policy. I don't know if any of you read the headlines today. First they had the coup last week. Now the Iranians backed have taken it over. Don't know if you know geography well. Yemen is on the border of Saudi Arabia. You've watched what just taken place to the Jordanian. This is a battle that's much larger. And I thought Tom Cotton made a very good point. We got attacked because of our way of life. They will continue to attack us. But there's a lot of people in the world that will stand up. And if we're silent, there's one reason why America should lead, because if we don't, who will? And when we don't lead, the world becomes unsafe. How we handle where we go forward, I think, will also determine the growth of the world as well. So we have to get our economic house in order. That brings us greater opportunity, tax reform, infrastructure, cybersecurity. We have to get the world a safer place, and that means we have to lead. We have to stand up for what we've promised. And then, from a Washington's point of view, both sides of the aisle have to understand they're not going to get 100% of what they want, because if that's what they believe, nothing will get done. Look, I'm a total optimist. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, and I'm the majority leader of the House. None of you thought that could happen either, true, right? Winston Churchill was an American too, his mother. And he always said you could count on Americans to do what's right after they exhausted every other option. I love Winston Churchill. But you know what quote I gave to our conference of Winston Churchill? During the challenge of the battle for World War II, the challenge of his elections, Winston Churchill said, I'm not concerned about what history will write, because it's my intention to write the history. That's the belief we should have of what the future holds for us. We should not be fearful of what history will write about our future. We should have the intent on writing it for ourselves. Thank you very much.
We now have a Q&A for the Congressman. And if you raise your hand, Lindsay and Alexis will bring the microphone to you. Thank you.
Pardon? Oh, okay. I really enjoyed your comments. Could you go back and expand for just another minute about Iran? It's my hot button. Seems like it's yours.
I have a real concern about Iran. As the world has become more dangerous, Iran has become stronger. When I was in Iraq, in Baghdad just 2 months ago, Iran is there fighting as well. Iran is fearful of the growth of ISIS because they don't want them to go into Iran. But when this gets done, where will they turn their weapons? Yemen. You look at the expansion. Every terrorist organization has expanded. Where have they been funded? And Iran sits there in a negotiation that just keeps being extended. And the whole reason they went to the negotiations is because our sanctions were strong. Now, our president and I disagree. He doesn't want any new sanctions sitting out there. He's fearful that the group together, that somehow Russia would leave the negotiations. But we've put the hardest sanctions on Russia during the negotiations and they haven't left. So I'm not quite sure why that would make them leave. I believe Iran only responds to strength. And they understand if they see weakness, they want to take an advantage to it. Play good cop, bad cop. The president can say, I got a bunch of crazy people in the house. They just want to destroy you. So if you can't come to this agreement, this is what will happen. More likely you'll come to an agreement. The expansion of what Iran has done around the world is very, very dangerous. So to me, that's got to be the main focus. If they are able to achieve and build nuclear weapons, everyone in the region will have a nuclear weapon. And then look at how we have to deal with North Korea. If you have multiple countries out there with that capability, it's a much different world. Yes?
Question over here.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Thank you for coming. I enjoyed your remarks as well. A lot of things to ask you, but the one I want to ask you about is the federal budget. We're $18 trillion in debt. People disagree about a lot of things, but I think one thing that the polling data shows pretty clearly is people are sick and tired of how much money Congress spends. And if you take a look at how much the federal government took in 1979, and you add inflation and population growth on top of that, the tax revenue has kept up with that, but the spending has more than kept up with that, so that, you know, net, we are spending way more money than we are taking in. And, you know, a lot of people in this room understand private business. If you had a private business operating this kind of deficit, you would see the CEO and the board impose 5%, 10% across the board cuts and tell their division heads, figure it out. Why doesn't Congress do that?
Well, if you look, there's two reasons why part has and part has not. Everyone thinks, well, you have all the purse strings. Parts of that true and parts of that is not true. There's two elements in a budget: mandatory spending and discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is everything you think government is, from our salaries to the Department of Agriculture, Department of Education, to Department of Defense. That's the smallest part of the budget. Now, we have just put caps on that. That was part of the challenge when Republicans took the majority in the House. And we capped the growth of that. That's why you've seen some of this come down. The president wants to lift those caps and increase spending by 11%. How many of you got 11% raise in the next year? Not there. The biggest challenge to control our spending is the mandatory: Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt. And why we speak today, 10,000 more people will qualify. And we don't have control over that. 10,000 more people will qualify the next day. For 16 years. So pretty soon they will take up the entire portion. So right now we borrow, not because we're in a war, but for our social welfare. But every time we talk about, for the younger generation, to protect that, but actually give bigger options and get it under control, everybody says you can't touch anything. Well, there won't be anything there if you don't. We're fortunate that rates are low. Just if rates went up, it would break us. We ought to look at a situation right now. Many of you are in business. What are you doing with lower rates? You probably lock them in for a longer time period. We do everything on a short term, so it can short term disrupt us very quickly. There's two things we have to do. We have to tackle the mandatory side. And that means you're going to have a private-public discussion about it. But then you have to expand the growth. Tax reform. Trade I didn't bring up, but trade is a perfect place for us to have a bipartisan agreement. TPP, TPA, and we're working on it right now. But so many times we look and think Washington is all of our problems, but think about our self-inflicted wounds. What's happening at the ports today? And we think we just read the headlines, oh, it's a slowdown. But it's not just a slowdown, it's hitting every small business. I've got people in Colorado calling me. I have people losing a tremendous amount of money because two sides can't come to an agreement, and they've been talking about this for a long time. And then if you look what's on the table, oh, you get a 3% increase every year for 5 years? What's the heartache? We've got to have innovation. But this is a place where Washington could step in, which I've requested, to have a mediator and settle this problem. This is a loss for all of California. And why every other port is going to be competing with us, and you look at the new Panama Canal coming through, and we're arguing about this, we're going to lose the future. We should stop worrying about the small things and look what America would look like 50 years from now. We sit downtown proudly in LA because we saw the renovation. No one really dreamed about what would it look around Staples Center and everything else, and would we get all these people to come back and have the revitalization here? You're going to have an observation tower right over there. We knew the heartache to go through it, but we should start planning for it. And the number one place is in the ports. Trade is a great avenue for us. It's the strength of California as well. Energy has been one of the greatest growth in the world, right here in America. People laughed when they said gasoline would be below $3. Why? Because of innovation. And we did it, and that's what's driving people to drive it lower. But we're getting self-inflicted wounds in California when we have some of the most abundant. Monterey Shell, we could be like North Dakota. Have no foreclosed homes. Don't worry about a budget in California. Be one of the fastest growing. But even the resources that we have today, the division of oil and gas is making it more difficult to be able to achieve what we can pump now. We're not thinking smart. Nobody wants to pollute the environment. Everybody understands there's a way to go forward and have the ability to do it. North Dakota has one of the strongest environmental records, ability to drill. But what they do is when they put a law down, they keep it. And everybody knows what the playing field is instead of keep switching it. That's what we need to look at in California instead of hurting ourselves. Yes. Oh, I'm picking people with no mic. That's okay. Go ahead.
Congressman, it's a real pleasure meeting you. Just got back from your lovely city of Bakersfield. Closer to home, how do you look at the water situation? Because some people are saying that the agriculture sector of California only accounts for 2.some% of our GDP on the state level. So we should ignore it. At the same time, agriculture is also Central Valley, one of the top 5 regions in the world. So what can be done at the federal level to compensate what we're doing at the state level to alleviate the farming community's concern?
You know, Aesop always has the different fables. Would you read them growing up? You ever read The Grasshopper and the Ant? Put it away, kept putting it away for tough times, and then when tough times came, they had it. In California, we continue to grow, but we've never invested in our infrastructure. Back when the Jerry Brown's father was governor. We have a water system. We've always known that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. We know we're a very large state, the snowpack's in the north, agriculture's in the Central Valley, population's in Southern California. You didn't feel it in Southern California, the drought that we had last year, but you'll feel it this year. Met's supplying 90% right now, you guys. We have depleted our groundwater because we had no place of going in, and some of this have been self-inflicted. What happens in the snowpack, it comes down through the valley, down through the delta. But because of one of our laws, we got a delta smelt of fish, that when you turn those pumps on, what happens? Dirt comes up, mud comes up, well, these fish are attracted to it. So you got to turn the pumps off. So where does the water go? Out to the ocean. So we lose. Now, it also goes by the level, because if the level's too low, the salt water comes in. I sat down, and it's very difficult. Water policy is probably one of the toughest. We've got legislation through the House twice. I sat down with Dianne Feinstein and had many meetings, and I will tell you, very constructive meetings, and she and I, came to an agreement. It's unfortunate I can't say the same thing of the other senator from California, and she stopped it. And you want to know how small the agreement was? It was a short-term one. Prior to these rains coming in, because the state had lifted, because of a drought, the governor has declared it, we had extraordinary actions that we could take, that we could allow those pumps to go sooner so we could capture more water to plan for the future. She denied us being able to move the bill. It would have been in the Cromney and would have become law. Then when I called her out, I said, well, you were trying to do something in secret. Nothing ever in secret. But she thinks if all 435 people are going to go in and negotiate a bill at one time, all that's going to happen is blow it up. When I sat to meet with her, she wouldn't even meet with me individually. She wanted all these other people in the room to try to blow the bill up instead of talk about where it's going. So I've just met again, and I'm going to work very closely with Dianne Feinstein, and we're going to have water legislation coming very shortly. We have to plan greater storage. We have storage capacity now, but we should be able to lift it and not let laws hold us back to prepare for the future. Just 4 years ago, we had 170% of snowpack. But you know how much water was allocated to come down in the state project? 70%. But one thing nobody knows throughout the Central Valley, you still pay for 100% even when you get zero. Farmland is being turned in. We have places that are 30% unemployed. It is devastating what's happening to California. And it doesn't have to be. Yes, it is a drought, but we have so much of it inflicted from government, we should be able to lift it. Yes, sir?
Can we talk a little about immigration reform?
Yes.
You're in a unique position to lead on this subject, given the agriculture in the Central Valley and the technology in the rest of our state. So talk to us about what you think a plan is for immigration reform.
Immigration reform. Very difficult on both sides, but everybody understands our immigration system is broken. A lot of debate is about what do you do with people that are already here illegally. I say you should set that aside for a moment and first look at the immigration system that we have. Because we all believe in legal immigration, do we not? But do you believe in the legal immigration system that is currently set by America? That we limit the number of the percentage of people who can come from each country. No one country could have more than 7% of the work permits. That you have to pretty much win the lottery, and then it's chain migration, meaning just your family comes here. But if you're here on a visa and you become a PhD or an engineer, we tell you to go to another country and compete against us because H-1Bs fill up in 4 days. Is that the system you want to perpetuate? So I want to, and if people are upset about people here illegally, 42% of everyone that's here illegally came here legally on a visa and overstayed it, and we have no way of tracking them. I can send you a package and track it all the way, but I have a system I can't track here. And then when you catch someone that comes over illegally, we give them a ticket and hope they show up one day for court. I'm not quite sure that happens very often, do you? First and foremost, you have to be able to secure the border so everybody feels trust. And it's not the idea of a border security because of just immigration. Do you know who we catch down there? Many people from the Middle East and different places. You want to know what's happening. And that doesn't mean it has to be all a fence. There's many ways to go about doing it, and you'll see it. The immigration system itself, you want to make sure it works and be able to compete. I believe in a guest workers program. I think, and when it comes to H-1Bs, why wouldn't you let the economy determine how many engineers we need than Washington picking a number and then when you have a crisis trying to decide? When we had the slowdown in tech, we didn't reach the number. Today we reach it in 4 days, so people set up companies in other countries instead of growing it here. That's about the opportunity. When I look at competition around the world, if we don't have an immigration system that works, we won't be able to compete further. There's a very good book out there that gives you a lot of data and statistics. But in the year 2050, there'll be more people over the age of 100 than under the age of 5 in America. We do not succeed well when we have, or no society does, when the major population is older instead of the future. You always want the future to look brighter, so you want the younger generation to be able to be larger and working more. We can achieve that with the right immigration system and the right economy.
Question?
Yes.
Looking out for the fall, this year, and looking at the issues that will separate Republicans and Democrats, can you foresee yourself voting on any issue, especially if your party asks for a vote to shut down the federal government?
We shut the federal government down once every 17 years. That's as often as cicadas come back in D.C. So a shutting of the federal government is a dysfunction on all sides. Nobody wins from that. And we put a lot into it, and we put a lot into it now with seeing it, but today's Ronald Reagan's birthday, he shut it down many times. And both sides will argue they never voted to shut it down. They voted on a bill that would keep it open, but the other side disagreed with it. I'll give you an example. There are 12 spending bills in America for appropriations. 11 of them were passed in the last little bit. The key thing you want to have is a budget. The Senate hasn't done a budget in a number of years. House will. For the first time, we'll have a budget on both sides, so it sets the framework. There's one spending bill that's not done, Department of Homeland Security. And people will say it's about a different issue. I'm concerned with that we created a country with 3 co-equal branches. And does anybody in America believe they're co-equal today? And you don't have them co-equal to protect the branches, to protect all of us. I wouldn't care if it was a Republican president, Green Party, whoever. There's a responsibility in the Constitution that you have to maintain. Article 1, Section 7 says all tax policy starts in the House. That doesn't mean I'm going to allow the Senate or somebody else to do it. 22 times the president said he did not have the power to take the action that he took. What changed from the time the president said that to the months later he did it? The Constitution never changed. There is a challenge in this country today, and I would blame presidents in the past to now, to try to bring all that power into one. And there's nothing wrong with standing up and having the debate. Now, Homeland Security, we took a constitutional action that the president thought many times that he could not do, and he tried to take, and we funded everything else, and we sent it to the Senate. This week, and the Senate has many different rules, you have to get 60 to bring a bill up. I just had this debate with Steny Hoyer on the floor. Steny Hoyer is the minority whip, and he argued, we're trying to shut the government down. Well, how is that the case if we took action? It doesn't run out of money till the end of February. We took this action in January, sent it to the House, and for 3 days in the Senate, the Republicans asked to bring the bill up, and the Senate, Democrat Senate blocked it, wouldn't let it get to 60. That doesn't mean the bill passes, but you couldn't even bring the bill up to vote against it or to change it. So my argument is, who's trying to put us in a tough situation? In the first 5 days, the president offered 5 veto threats on bills that were voted on bipartisan. I was having lunch with the president. I said, Mr. President, there is a legislative process. We have to pass a bill. The Senate has to pass a bill. You go to conference. You get to decide whether you veto or not. You offer the veto threats before we even vote on it. What does that do to the legislative process? You still have the option to say no. I had lunch with the president at one prior time than that, prior to being sworn in, but after the election. It was the Senate leadership and the House leadership on both sides. And I was discussing with the president that I didn't believe if he took action that that would be the most possible thing to do, that it would harm the process. Because the debate I had with him, whatever action he takes on immigration, he can't solve the problem. But he creates a situation where it makes it harder to get an immigration solution. And if we really want the economy to grow, we have to have an immigration solution. And he's going to be president for 2 more years, which is the first thing he reminded us of when we had lunch. And he had the House, the Senate, and the White House all in control, and they did nothing on immigration. But he wasn't even allowing us one day in the majority to have the opportunity to deal with it. That's the concern I have. You know, one time during these fiscal crises and people worried about being something shut down, CEO of GE had this little dinner. And he brought some Senate Democrats, myself, a House Republican, and some White House people together, and we were talking about ways we could find common ground. And at the end of the night, you could give one piece of advice to anybody you wanted to. And so I offered my advice to the White House. And I said, I'd have the president call Bill Clinton once a week for 30 minutes. They said, why would you call Bill Clinton? I said, well, Ronald Reagan's dead, but Bill Clinton had Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole. Philosophically didn't agree and really didn't like each other and had a change in power. And they vetoed a few things, but eventually they reformed welfare and they balanced the budget and had a very successful presidency. And took that advice, and I was having lunch one day, and I was telling Bill Clinton, he was sitting next to me. And when I told him the story, Bill Clinton kind of laughed. He goes, oh, no, you didn't. Then he turned around and he said, who'd you tell that to? Right. When America gave a different political decision in an election, Bill Clinton came to the microphones and said the era of big government is over. That was the message from the election. I think it would be more helpful if this president also understood the last election as well. We should both. I can work with anybody willing to work. It's just very difficult when you start off with a veto threat. Yes?
Final question from our students over here.
Good afternoon, Congressman. What is the purpose of Republican attempts to strip away some of the provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act, such as the blocker rule?
When you look at Dodd-Frank, and it's not as stripping away provisions. Anytime in history of America, when you pass a major change in legislation, and you do it from one party, I don't think that's helpful, regardless if any party did it. Secondly, anytime you take up legislation based upon some action or crisis, you should always be able to adjust and look at real-world form. I've watched numerous parts of Dodd-Frank when they had the debate on the floor from Dodd and Frank claiming that this is not the intention of this bill, but then it goes there. We live in a continually changing world. And one principle and philosophy I have is where capital is king, jobs are created. Many items within Dodd-Frank push capital away from America. Now, first and foremost, you want to protect people, but you also want to make sure capital is able to grow. There's many that believe you can't touch anything on Dodd-Frank. I think that's a wrong philosophy for any bill in America. You should be able to look at it. We live in a changing society. You could take the tradition of the past and apply it to a changing future. And my belief is, if we want to keep up with the rest of the world, we've got to be able to look, and if there's parts of Dodd-Frank, which I firmly believe hold us back from being competitive and do not achieve the goal of keeping and protecting us to be stronger, let's debate it and let's have an opportunity to change it.
Please thank the Congressman for this fabulous speech.
Thank you very much.